Another question from the GTOlab Discord. How do you deal with knowing you could have made a different decision? You've, made a mistake. Maybe it's cost you a lot of EV. How do you handle that?
The reason I'm laughing is because, I think everyone that knows me is the answer is terrible. What's the honest answer? I dwell on them. I make a way bigger deal of them than they should be. I think about hands I made mistakes over the last 2 years, probably on a daily basis.
That's good that you're down to 2 years. It used to be like 8.
It's still, yeah. I don't forget them. I don't brush them off. It does mean that, I'm not just like, oh man, you suck, you're the worst. I learned from them, but it also means, I have an issue with making mistakes, and it certainly probably inhibits my ability to not be fearful of making mistakes in the future, which that's a fine line, right? Like, you have to care, but you also have to have the ability to understand how difficult the game is and understand that you're not going to be perfect or close to it. And then just kind of, for lack of better words, and this is quite cliche, but learn from them, there's some spots I think about where I had the right idea of the spot and I did something that was wrong. And then when I looked into it, the right idea of the spot wasn't even correct. And that was what led me to make the mistake, if that makes any kind of sense. Mm-hmm. So I've had spots where I have a final table, usually the night before those, I'm very obsessive about preparing and looking at what all the solutions for the next day would look like for example, in an ICM scenario. And then I get a very good idea of what the spots would look like. But I've been playing poker for so long that I should probably just play and do what I think is right and understand that I've prepared already up to this point and not let that kind of stuff blind my decision making. So I think that letting the mistakes stick with me helps me to understand that sometimes it was like preparation that led me to make mistakes and led me to deviate from playing poker the way that I should myself, if that makes sense. So that's something that is constructive and helpful going forward. But, I've got to learn to be better at not dwelling on them. And that being said, too, I don't think it's good to, when things aren't going well and you've made mistakes in big spots, and when things aren't going well, you dwell on them more, obviously, because, if you make a mistake and you end up winning the tournament or something like that, it just doesn't stick with you as much, even though it should be the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I've always been kind of on the opposite side of the spectrum and been the guy who doesn't care enough and, brush it off. But last year, playing a full high roller schedule, definitely the most humbling thing for me was that twice I did get completely knocked on my ass in terms of just how astoundingly upset I was with myself over a mistake. There were 2 hands where, one of them, you were just talking me off the ledge because I had to I was just I felt like a mess that night. I lost a huge hand in the beginning of the super high roller bowl to Ike. And I just felt basically like going on a bender that night. And you were a good resource to talk to as someone who's so hard on yourself so consistently. It took me by surprise because I'm just not that guy. I generally am like, that's poker. Sometimes you look like a genius. Sometimes you're a complete fucking moron. But between, it's just a different element being in that kind of elite world. No matter how much you don't think you care what people think and, how much you think, for me, I don't think of my identity that much as a high stakes poker player or a poker player at all. It's always been a piece of me, but I realized that night, I'm like, whoa, you're taking this way more serious than you like to admit to yourself. And I thought, that, and then a punt I had a couple months after that, those were really interesting experiences for me to see how hard I could fall apart over a poker hand.
Yeah, it's a product of the environment. It's obviously very intense and it's a lot of pressure, and every hand being streamed and the reg community being so ready and willing to jump on any mistake and pile on somebody at any moment, whether it be private or public. And being aware of that is difficult to handle. And I think that I've tried a lot myself to not be critical of other players, because we're all in the same experience and it's not productive. And typically it's some sort of insecurity that you're expressing about yourself if you're really waiting for someone to make a mistake and talk to other people about it. And I've been bad about that in the past, but I'm making mistakes as well. And I think it's something that we all need to stop doing. And you don't learn from anything. You learn from watching other players make mistakes in a constructive way, but not in a gossipy or how bad is this guy type of way. And I really don't want to be like that in the future. And I think that that being aware of that contributes to the stress and anxiety that we feel ourselves, because if we do it, if we snicker behind someone else's back, like, we know that people are going to do it to us as well, right? So I think that's really unhealthy for everyone involved. And I really want to make a concentrated effort to not do that anymore.
All right.